Transforming suffering into peace. I read about a Stoic philosopher in ancient Greece who, when he was told that his son had died in an accident, replied, I knew he was not immortal. Is that surrender? If it is, I don't want it. There are some situations in which surrender seems unnatural and inhuman. Being cut off from your feelings is not surrender, but we don't know what his inner state was when he said those words. In certain extreme situations, it may still be impossible for you to accept the now, but you always get a second chance to surrender. Your first chance is to surrender each moment to the reality of that moment, knowing that what is cannot be undone because it is already is. You say yes to what is or accept what isn't. Then you do what you have to do whenever the situation arises. If you abide in this state of acceptance, you create no more negativity, no more suffering, no more unhappiness. You then live in a state of non resistance, a state of grace and lightness, free of struggle. Whenever you are unable to do that, whenever you miss that chance, either because you're not generating enough conscious presence to prevent some habitual and unconscious resistance pattern from arising, or because the condition is so extreme as to absolute unacceptable to you, then you are creating some form of pain, some form of suffering. It may look as if the situation is creating the suffering, but ultimately, this is not so. Your resistance is. Now, here is your second chance at surrender. If you cannot accept what is outside, then accept what is inside. If you cannot accept the external condition, accept the internal condition. This means do not resist the pain. Allow it to be there. Surrender to the grief, despair, fear, loneliness, or whatever form the suffering takes. Witness it without labeling it mentally. Embrace it. Then see how the miracle of surrender transmutes deep suffering into deep peace. This is your crucifixion. Let it become your resurrection and ascension. I do not see how one can surrender to suffering. As you yourself pointed out, suffering is non surrender. How could you surrender to non surrender? Forget about surrender for a moment. When your pain is deep, all talk of surrender will probably seem futile and meaningless anyway. When your pain is deep, you will likely have a strong urge to escape from it rather than surrender to it. You do not want to feel what you feel. What could be more normal? But there is no escape, no way out. There are many pseudo escapes: work, drink, drugs, anger, projection, suppression, and so on. But they don't free you from the pain. Suffering does not diminish in intensity when you make it unconscious. When you deny emotional pain, everything you do or think, as well as your relationships, become contaminated with it. You broadcast it, so to speak, as the energy you emanate, and others will pick it up subliminally. If they are unconscious, they may even feel compelled to attack or hurt you in some way, or you may hurt them in an unconscious projection of your pain. You attract and manifest whatever corresponds to your inner state. When there is no way out, there is still always a way through. So don't turn away from the pain. Face it, feel it fully. Feel it, don't think about it. Express it if necessary, but don't create a script in your mind around it. Give all your attention to the feeling, not to the person, event, or situation that seems to have caused it. Don't let the mind use the pain to create a victim identity for yourselves out of it. Feeling sorry for yourself and telling others your story will keep you stuck in suffering. Since it is impossible to get away from the feeling, the only possibility of change is to move into it. Otherwise, nothing will shift. So give your complete attention to what you feel and refrain from mentally labeling it. As you go into the feeling, be instantly alert. At first, it may seem like a dark, terrifying place. And when the urge to turn away from it comes, observe it, don't act on it. Keep putting your attention on the pain, keep feeling the grief, the fear, the dread, the loneliness, whatever it is. Stay alert, stay present with your whole being, with every cell of your body. As you do so, you are bringing a light into this darkness. This is the flame of your consciousness. At this stage, you don't need to be concerned with surrender anymore. It has happened already. How? Full attention is full acceptance, is surrender. By giving full attention, you use the power of now, which is the power of your presence. No hidden pocket of resistance can survive in it. Presence removes time. Without time, no suffering, no negativity can survive. The acceptance of suffering is a journey into death, facing deep pain, allowing it to be, taking your attention into it is to enter death consciously. When you have died this death, you realize that there is no death and there is nothing to fear. Only the ego dies. Imagine a ray of sunlight that has forgotten it is an inseparable part of the sun and deludes itself into believing it has to fight for survival and create and cling to an identity other than the sun. Would the death of this delusion not be incredibly liberating? Do you want an easy death? Would you rather die without pain, without agony, than die to the past every moment and let the light of your presence shine away the heavy time bound self you thought of as you? So it's not necessary, even at times of extreme circumstances, as a death of a closed one, definitely there is going to be a lot of grief. But it's, and there is no harm in facing those emotions or living those emotions. See, the whole issue is, if there is something with which you are not comfortable, does not necessarily mean that you have to label it as bad. It is just an experience. बट जब हम उसको लेबलिंग और जज करने शुरू कर देते हैं सिचुएशन को, पर्सन को, that is where the mind and the ego comes in. If there has been a death of, of a closed one in the family, it's natural. I mean, death is a part of birth. You take a birth because you will die. And definitely at that time, there is going to be grief. There is going to be grief for the family. There is going to be grief amongst the close relatives, the close friends. Absolutely important. And it's absolutely important to live your grief, because we do not want the emotions to be stuck inside of us. So we need to live and fully live those emotions. But they can also be lived without any labeling, without any judgment. So expressing grief, feeling grief, or any of these emotions is okay. And especially if it's coming from a premise of being consciously aware and without any judgment, without any criticism, without any comparison, or without any expectation. It's just an emotion that has come to you and you're living it without judging it. That's absolutely okay. And that is true surrender, because then you're not resisting. So wherever there is a resistance, there you get to a point where there is non-acceptance, where there is non-surrender. But where there is total acceptance or whatever is, if it's a moment of grief, you are accepting the grief and you're living that grief without judging it. And in this journey, like it's beautifully explained in the example by the author, कि अगर वो sun की ray थोड़ी सी दूर आ जाए and starts thinking that I am not part of the sun and starts creating a new identity, it will be a part of sun because it has risen or it has, taken birth from that sun. So that is an extension of the sun. So the sunlight, what we see, these are all extensions of the sun. So it's a similar way when we get connected to that source, when we get connected into that feeling of oneness, we get this clear connection of, everybody being connected to that source and everybody being one. That is the oneness of life. Everybody is connected to that same source and everybody is, just one. The way of the cross. There are many accounts of people who say they have found God through their deep suffering, and there is the Christian expression, the way of the cross, which I suppose points to the same thing. Papa, drink some water. Okay, thank you. We are concerned with nothing else here. Strictly speaking, they did not find God through their suffering because suffering implies resistance. They found God through surrender, through total acceptance of what is, into which they were forced by their intense suffering. They must have realized on some level that their pain was self created. How do you equate surrender with finding God? Since resistance is inseparable from the mind, relinquishment of resistance, surrender is the end of the mind as your master, the impostor pretending to be you, the false God. Yeah. The realm, all judgment and all negativity dissolve. The realm of being, which has been obscured by the mind, then opens up. Suddenly, a great stillness arises within you, an unfathomable sense of peace. And within that peace, there is great joy. And within that joy, there is love. And at the innermost core, there is the sacred, the immeasurable, that which cannot be named. I don't call it finding God because how can you find that which you never lost? The very life that you are. The word God is limiting not only because of thousands of years of misperception and misuse, but also because it implies an entity other than you. God is being itself, not a being. There can be no subject object relationship here, no duality, know you and God. God realization is the most natural thing there is. The amazing and incomprehensible fact is not that you can become conscious of God, but that you are not conscious of God. The way of the cross that you mentioned is the old way to enlightenment, and until recently, it was the only way. But don't dismiss it or underestimate its efficacy. It still works. The way of the cross is a complete reversal. It means that the worst thing in your life, your cross, turns into the best thing that ever happened to you by forcing you into surrender, into death, forcing you to become as nothing, to become as God, because God too is nothing. All this time, as far as the unconscious majority of the humans is concerned, the way of the cross is still the only way. They will only awaken through further suffering, and enlightenment as a collective phenomena will be predictably preceded by vast upheavals. This process reflects the working of certain universal laws that govern the growth of consciousness and thus was foreseen by some seers. It is described, among other places, in the book of Revelation or Apocalypse through cloaked in obscure and sometimes impenetrable symbology. This suffering is inflicted not by God, but by humans on themselves and on each other, as well as by certain defensive measures that the earth, which is a living, intelligent organism, is going to take to protect herself from the onslaught of human madness. However, there is a growing number of humans alive today whose consciousness is sufficiently evolved not to need any more suffering before the realization of enlightenment. You may be one of them. Enlightenment through suffering, the way of the cross, means to be forced into the kingdom of heaven, kicking and screaming. You finally surrender because you can't stand the pain anymore. But the pain could go on for a long time until this happens. Enlightenment, consciously chosen, means to relinquish your attachment to past and future and to make the now the main focus of your life. It means choosing to dwell in the state of presence rather than in time. It means saying yes to what is. You then don't need pain anymore. How much more time do you think you will need before you are able to say, I will create no more pain, no more suffering? How much more pain do you need before you can make that choice? If you think you need more time, you will get more time and more pain. Time and pain are inseparable ways. So, yes, coming from the ancient times of Jesus when he was crucified on the cross. So the way of the cross was one of the predominant ways. It especially is being revered to a lot of places where Christianity is being proclaimed. But that's one way. In fact, if you talk about all the ascended masters, you know, a lot of organizations, lot of religions, they all have their ascended masters, and everyone will have a different way. It's not that everybody's way is the same. It's like you're taking a journey from point A to point B, where you have n number of options. You can either take a flight, you can either take a train, you can either drive, take a bike, you know, take a helicopter, anything. So जिसकी भी रास्ता है, the end is the same, and the end talks about self-realization. Self-realization, we are taking that journey within ourselves to know who we truly are. That is self-realization. And once we get connected to that true self of ours, Then comes the God realization. That is the journey for all. So, be it through pain, be it through the crucifixion, be it through meditation, be it through dhyan, be it through yoga, any which way. It's a journey within connecting to your true self, realizing who you truly are, and meeting up with that person who you truly are, and then connecting or getting to that phase of God realization. So it's a journey of self realization to God realization. The power to choose. What about all those people who it seems actually want to suffer? I have a friend whose partner is physically abusive toward her, and her previous relationship was of a similar kind. Why does she choose such men, and why is she refusing to get out of that situation now? Why do so many people actually choose pain? I know that the word choose is a favorite new age term, but it isn't entirely accurate in this context. It is misleading to say that somebody chose a dysfunctional relationship or any other negative situation in his or her life. Choice employs consciousness, a high degree of consciousness. Without it, you have no choice. Choice begins the moment you disidentify from the mind and its conditioned patterns. The moment you become present. Until you reach that point, you are unconscious. Spiritually speaking, this means that you are compelled to think, feel, and act in certain ways according to the conditioning of your mind. This is why Jesus said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." This is not related to intelligence in the conventional sense of the word. I have met many highly intelligent and educated people who were also completely unconscious, which is to say, completely identified with their mind. In fact, if mental development and increased knowledge are not counterbalanced by a corresponding growth in consciousness, the potential for unhappiness and disaster is very great. Your friend is stuck in a relationship with an abusive partner and not for the first time. Why? No choice? The mind conditioned as it is by the past. Always seek to recreate what it knows and is familiar with. Even if it is painful, at least it is familiar. The mind always adheres to the known. The unknown is dangerous because it has no control over it. Then why the mind dislikes and ignores the present moment? Present moment awareness creates a gap not only in the stream of mind but also in the past future continuum. Nothing truly new and creative can come into this world except through that gap, that clear space of infinite possibility. So, your friend, being identified with her mind, may be recreating a pattern learned in the past in which intimacy and abuse are inseparably linked. Alternatively, she may be acting out of a mind pattern learned in early childhood, according to which she is unworthy and deserves to be punished. It is possible too that she lives a large part of her life through the pain body, which always seeks more pain on which to feed. Her partner has his own unconscious patterns which complements her. Of course, her situation is self-created, but who or what is the self that is doing the creating? A mental emotional pattern from the past, no more. Why make a self out of it? If you tell her that she has chosen her condition or situation, you are reinforcing her state of mind identification. But is her mind pattern who she is? Is it herself? Is it her true identity derived from the past? Show your friend how to be the observing presence behind her thoughts and her emotions. Tell her about the pain body and how to free herself from it. Teach her the art of inner body awareness. Demonstrate to her the meaning of presence. As soon as she is able to access the power of now and thereby break through her conditioned past, she will have a choice. Nobody chooses dysfunction, conflict, pain. Nobody chooses insanity. They happen because there is not enough presence in you to dissolve the past, not enough light to dispel the darkness. You are not fully there. You have not quite woken up yet. In the meantime, the conditioned mind is running your life. Similarly, if you are one of the many people who have an issue with their parents, if you still harbor resentment about something they did or did not do, then you still believe that they had a choice, that they could have acted differently. It always looks as if people had a choice, but that is an illusion. As long as your mind, with its conditioned patterns, runs your life, as long as you are your mind, what choice do you have? None. You are not even there. The mind identified state is severely dysfunctional. It is a form of insanity. Almost everyone is suffering from the illness in varying degrees. The moment you realize this, there can be no more resentment. How can you resent someone's illness? The only appropriate response is compassion. So that means nobody is responsible for what they do. I don't like that idea. If you are run by your mind, although you have no choice, you will still suffer the consequence of your unconsciousness and you will create further suffering. You will bear the burden of fear, conflict, problems, and pain. The suffering thus created will eventually force you out of your unconscious state. What you say about choice also applies to forgiveness, I suppose. You need to be fully conscious and surrender before you can forgive. Forgiveness is a term that has been in use for 2000 years, but most people have a very limited view of what it means. You cannot truly forgive yourself or others as long as you derive your sense of self from the past. Only through accessing the power of the now, which is your own power, can there be true forgiveness. This renders the past powerless, and you realize deeply that nothing you ever did or that was ever done to you could touch, even in the slightest, the radiant essence of who you are. The whole concept of forgiveness then becomes unnecessary. And how do I get to that point of realization? When you surrender to what is and so become fully present, the past ceases to have any power. You do not need it anymore. Presence is the key, the now is the key. And how will I know when I have surrendered? When you no longer need to ask the question. The end.